Hello everyone. So I'm gonna go through today some of the comparisons I've done pre and post carburetor rebuild, and what I have here is a spreadsheet which I've done. I don't really know if this is going to show up on the video, so I'm going to do what I can, backing off a little bit and then zooming in a little bit. But you can see here these yellow, the yellow means average fuel mileage. It's based on my vacuum gauge, which yellow means like average to poor. Green means good fuel economy. The pink is basically poor, very poor, bad, as it says on the vacuum gauge, fuel economy. So this is the trip I made with the family. We called it Road Trip 2.0, and I'm just recording, refilling and checking the mileage and everything. This is the between the fuel fills, what the gas mileage was, which is not bad. We start off at 6.5 miles to the gallon. Then you get in a little better spot and you get almost 15 miles to the gallon, then back down to 7.59, which is better than what I've been doing, and then it drops below 6 miles to the gallon, and really horrible on the way home, 2.2. That's when I decided to rebuild the carb, because it had absolutely no guts whatsoever. We were going through the hills of Pennsylvania. It was getting 5 miles to the gallon, and so at the end of the day, the total trip was again 3,200 miles. That was the average miles per gallon before the carburetor was rebuilt, and a whole whopping nearly 500 gallons of fuel consumed based on all the receipts. So it gets up there. So then we go to the shorter trip up to Thousand Islands, and again this is just a a smaller comparison is what's going on here. So we get some average, and then we get to cruising around Canada, fairly level trips. So what I've got here is based on this next trip. I got 2 in the red or pink. I've got 1 average. That was the trip up there to the Thousand Islands. Then as I mentioned before, this is like just driving around Canada. There's no major grade changes. Got a great mileage at 11 and almost 11 and a half miles to the gallon, which is great. And then the drive home really stunk. And why? Because look at this, 5 miles to the gallon, 3.61. I mean, that's horrible. Well, there's a reason for that, because of, let's say, the weather conditions were not conducive to a vehicle that was not so aerodynamic. It's a brick, with an angled front end, but it's still a brick. So I was driving from the Thousand Islands across the Tug Hill Plateau, and basically I was dealing with major crosswinds and headwinds the entire time back. So as you can see here, it really foobarred my average mileage, and here is what the results were. It substantially dropped my mileage down to close to what I was getting for the entire trip to Florida and back. Fuel consumption wasn't horrible. It had about 60 gallons, but still, it did not bode well for me. Don't disregard this stuff down here. I don't have an accurate amount, but in any case, with the carb rebuild, the big thing was the driving performance. I was pulling more vacuum on average on my vacuum gauge. The rig was driving a lot better. I mean, there were times where I was literally coasting versus, you know, putting gas into the carb. When the conditions were right, you could hear like a woo, like a little harmonic humming noise, because literally the carb was balancing between, you know, getting gassed and just coasting. So I was getting that sort of, just that humming noise you get sometimes with a carburetor. Very, very few situations where I'd have punched 4 barrels. Very few. Maybe 2 or 3 instances where I was below 5 pounds vacuum, where I went into like 4-barrel mode to really accelerate. That happened, just like I said, very few times. As many times as I could count on my hand, which is about 5. And the rest of the time I could, you know, based on choices, if I drove 55 miles an hour, this MPG would be closer to 8. I kid you not, because when I was down in the 55 mile an hour range, the vacuum was pretty close to what I was getting when I was on idle. Idle was 18 pounds vacuum, and I was literally getting 15 pounds on the thruway as long as the wind wasn't blowing me around or I wasn't trying to accelerate. It would go down to like 10 when I was like doing the general acceleration just to keep up the speed up the hill, or, you know, I needed to like punch it a little bit to get going, but other than that it wasn't a big deal. So I would imagine this MPG rating would be a lot better, but the average, you know, still doesn't lie. It's still showing me that there's not a huge like boost in performance from a mileage standpoint, efficiency standpoint, with a rebuilt 4-barrel versus my old one, which had been in the engine for a while. It has boosted a little bit, and I'll tell you, it has really boosted the average performance. If I had things in my favor from a environmental standpoint, I didn't have a big headwind or crosswind, I probably would almost get into the double digits, because I mean, I literally was getting close to that, driving around in conditions where, I mean, I was driving at a decent pace, don't get me wrong, I wasn't doing 70, but I was doing 55, 60. This reflects more of the Thousand Island Parkway, which is more of a 50 to 55 mile an hour speed limit. And I'll be honest with you, without the big headwind or crosswind, that's what I was getting. So that's what I would expect if I could get a situation where, you know, that was great. But in the end of the day, I'm expecting probably still going to be getting around 6 to 7 miles of the gallon without any major modifications, either to the rear end or the transmission or a gear vendor's unit. And that's where I'm at. That's just what it is based on the math. So I just thought I'd let people know that, and we'll go from there. Let's see if I'm gonna do something to this rig to help performance in other ways other than just, you know, rebuilding the car. So hope that information helps folks that are making choices with rebuilding the carb. I don't think it's a bad idea if you have an old carb. But if you're expecting some sort of major boost in your performance from a efficiency standpoint, don't expect it. This carb is a carb is a carb. If it wasn't horrible to begin with, it's probably not going to increase your performance after you rebuild it, but it's not a bad idea. And like I said, it gave me the opportunity to get like major thunderstorms, everything else, and major wind shifts on the trip back, which just, I mean, were blowing the RV all over the place. I spent more time, you know, steering than anything else, which tells me not very efficient for the fuel mileage. And it's reflected in, and I had a headwind pretty much all the way back home, which is reflected by these two numbers. It makes a big difference when you're driving. So that might be in some of your vacation planning. Check the weather, see what you're doing, because it's not like quite like an airplane, but it sort of is if you think about it. You know, if you've got a 100-mile headwind and you're flying a small prop-driven aircraft, it's going to have a certain fuel efficiency versus having a tailwind. If I had a tailwind the whole way, I'm sure I would have had nearly double digits the whole way. Alright, like I said before, hope that helps, and I'll continue experimenting with my RV in ways to make it more fuel efficient. And again, all these numbers are based on, believe it or not, they're based on the generator running the entire time. So these numbers and these numbers you see here, they're all based on me running the generator the entire time. What's the big difference between running my own end generator or not? I don't know. I'm gonna have to try that at some point, and figure out how much gas the generator takes up. I've looked into installing fuel flow meters. They're not cheap. I've certainly seen a bunch. The lower capacity ones, I don't need ones telling me 20 gallons per minute flow rate. I just need ones that are going to tell me basically 60 gallons per day, which equates to very low flow rate. I'd like to know how many physical gallons go through per the generator per the time it's running, and be able to run efficiency numbers based on that. I can only do it on the fuel gauge on the dashboard, which is subject to angle of the RV, the slope, whatever, acceleration, deceleration. The gas gauge goes up or down based on that. There's basically a float system, not very well damped and not really super accurate. So I'll continue to find ways to figure out just exactly how much fuel is being used and what the efficiency rating truly is for this rig. Take care and happy and safe RV.